Good evening, wherever you are. It might be evening. I hope it is evening. This is Cocktail Hour. My name is Dale DeGroff, a.k.a. King Cocktail, and I am brought to you here on Not Live Instagram because here in the wilds of southeastern Connecticut, I don't have enough broadband to do this live for you, so I'm recording it. And I'm coming to you, as I said, courtesy of the San Francisco World Spirits Competition and sponsored by the new craft of the cocktail, my book. One of the drinks is not in here, but something similar is in here. It's in the history or evolution of the martini section, and that's what I'm going to begin with. I'm going to begin with a Harry Johnson style Fitty 1888 martini. Now, I had my first Fitty when I went to Audrey Saunders' wonderful Pegu Club. I had been a sort of a pretty standard dry beefeater martini style of martini drinker up to that point. And the Fitty cocktail got under my skin after several tries at Pegu Club. And I looked back into the 19th century and then realized that between 1888 and Prohibition, all the martinis were 50-50. And so I am making a relatively 50-50 martini here using, as Harry Johnson did in 1888, an Old Tom gin. And this one is made by Tad Seed at Ransom Distillery in Oregon. And it's a good one. I think the mash bill was researched by David Wondrich. It's got malted and unmalted barley, some of it grown right there in the estate of Tad's. And so I'm going to be using both sweet and dry. Probably sweet was what he used in 1888. It was the most popular at the time. The Noilly Prat was a little slow getting up to the Northeast. It came through the port of New Orleans originally, a French port. That would make sense. And they drank it as a kind of a sweet wine, probably down there. I'm going to make this with both sweet and dry. And let's begin with the dry. There will be a little bit more of the dry than the sweet. And this will be a little under 50-50, but it's going to be close. And the vermouth, and by the way, the vermouth I'm using for the dry is Dolan, winey, Chambry-style vermouth. I like it. It's not as spicy as the Italians and some of the Marseille vermouths. And this is the Coqui, and it's the Vermouth de Torino. I like those sort of chocolatey notes that are in here. And I'm not going to use as much of this. I'm going to use just for a little color and a little flavor to give it that 1888 feel of the Italian vermouth. Now, Tad's 2 ounces of Tad's wonderful. Oops, I'll take the cap off. I don't let me take it off. I'm an old guy and I forget these things. This is the 2 ounces of Tad's marvelous Old Tom. I had the good fortune of spending some time at that distillery and actually having dinner there. It was quite lovely. Okay, let's give it a good stir. I'm going to say maybe a 30 count here before it's souped. Oh yeah, nice aromas coming out of there. Tad's Old Tom is not sweet as most folks figured Old Tom should be. There's no rules with Old Tom because it's not even really a category, is it, officially? So we can do whatever the hell we want when we make it. And here we go. I'm going to just hit it with a touch of absinthe and a dash of my bitters. Why? Because I can. 2 things that I like. I'm not even going to garnish. That's kind of my garnish. This is called King's Ransom, and why wouldn't I? Here you are. King's Ransom. So, a little bit about the World Spirits Competition out in San Francisco. Andy Blue and Paul Pacall originally started it, and I started tasting from the very beginning. Paul broke off a few years down the road and started the East Coast Ultimate Spirits Competition. And both wonderful, both great judges, both wonderful spirits. And I, as a bartender, by the way, back in the 70s and or mid-70s, for bartenders, tasting was like, what? Bartenders didn't taste. Wine guys tasted. The kitchen guys tasted. Bartenders tasting? What's the point? That's what they all thought back then. Now, wasn't that dumb? Until David reminded us, David Wondrich, our historical oracle, that the cocktail was America's first culinary art form. So, of course, we learned how to taste. And I finally did learn how to taste in the 90s by my two very dear friends and business partners, Doug Frost and Steve Olson. Who else? Who else would you want to learn how to taste from? A brilliant wine guy and a brilliant wine and spirits guy. All right, this is good. Now I'm going to make a kind of a perfect Manhattan. I'm going to make it with that. Diageo started a company doing business as Orphan Barrel Whiskey Distilling Company, and there was a lot of controversy because there is no distilling going on at the Orphan Barrel Distilling Company, and that caused a little bit of uproar in the community on the internet, and Diageo was perfectly happy to admit that there was no distilling going on, that they took these barrels out of the Stitzel-Weller rick house, and that 7 of the 9 were made in the new Bernheim distillery some time ago. And in this case, it was 20 years old when they found the barrel and bottled it. And that's what it is in the bottle here. I tasted it against a 6-year-old American Woodford Reserve, and I assume that's 6 to 8 years old because there's no age designation. Could be 4 to 6 years old. Fine with bourbon. We all know that bourbon ages pretty quickly because of the heat in those metal-topped rick houses. Well, Woodford Reserve, however, is a stone rick house. So I found the Orphan Barrel. My wife tasted along with me. Jill found it very pleasing and soft, and so she liked it better than the Woodford Reserve. The Woodford Reserve have a bright acidity. I don't mean acidity in a bad way. I mean in a good way. Spirits need to have acidity. Alcohol is, after all, a fatty acid, isn't it? So I found the liveliness of the Woodford Reserve pleasing, and the alcohol. The alcohol was a little more there in the Woodford Reserve in a good way. And I found that there was still hiding in the finish some apple in the Barter House, Kentucky bourbon from the Orphan Distilling Company. And I was quite pleased with the taste also. So I would be happy to have both. In this case, I'm going to make my perfect Manhattan with the Barter House. Let me get a new mixing glass up here and get some ice in it. And away we can go. The judges, extraordinarily array of judges out west in San Francisco, from the wine world and the whiskey world, and just astonishingly good friends and wonderful tasters all. Let's begin here with my bitters. I can use my bitters. My bitters was originally, it's allspice. I had intended it as a replacement for the Ray and Nephew allspice dram that was taken off the menu when I was at the Rainbow Room. And I had used it in a lot of stuff. I used it kind of like bitters because the Ray and Nephew allspice dram was very, very spicy and very concentrated, although it was sweet. This is by no means sweet. This is so dry, so bitter, that I've told bartenders not to taste it because you can only really experience it by smelling it and then mixing it. It doesn't compute on the tongue because it's so bitter. I was going to use it to calm down the sweetness of tiki drinks, I thought at first, because I had used Ray and Nephew in a lot of tiki-style rum drinks. Then I found out that it takes a regular Manhattan and turns it dry, just like that. And so I started using it in my Manhattans. Even though I put the same amount of vermouth, it suddenly became a dry Manhattan. I like that. So what am I going to do here? I'm going to use, it's almost perfect. I'm going to use a little less dry than sweet. So it's an almost perfect Manhattan with my Barter House Orphan Barrel Bourbon. I'll bring this up to about 3/4. So we're just about 3/4 of an ounce shy of being equal parts of vermouth and whiskey, which is just fine. I found that when I started tending bar back in the 70s, people wanted equal parts of whiskey and vermouth. That's where the tastes were back then. Isn't that interesting? And I'm going to use 2 ounces of the Barter House 20-year-old bourbon. It's astonishing. Let's give this a good stir. So the new craft of the cocktail 2020. I wanted to pay tribute to all my mates, all the young bartenders of the new millennium who have done astonishing things. Absolutely astonishing things that I could never have imagined would happen. And at the community that they've developed of friendship and caring, really, where people take care of one another. That the only take caring we did back in the 70s and earlier was when you threw the 20 on the bar at your mate's bar and you drank for you all night, and then you threw a 20 on your bar and you drank, and he drank for you all night. That was our community. But to see what's happening today with people like Lynette Marrero and Ivy Mix raising money for women in breast cancer in the industry, and all the stuff that Tony Abelgan is doing with the Helen David Foundation, it's astonishing to me. And then, of course, what's going in the glass. There's so many things that I had never imagined would end up in a cocktail glass. So I've tried to represent some of those cocktails and some of those with their names, obviously, the creators of those cocktails, in the new craft of the cocktail, and to tell the story of where the craft of the cocktail came from, because I think that it was really the culinary side of the business that created our audience, that were in love with big flavor, willing to take chances. Without that culinary revolution that happened 30 years prior to the new millennium, I don't think we would have had a craft cocktail movement. We wouldn't have had an audience. Anyway, let's strain this out. Now I got to drink both of these because, as I said, I'm in southeastern Connecticut and all my mates are back in New York City, so I'm just going to have to sit on the porch out there, light a cigar. I'll drink that martini first and put this away in the refrigerator for a minute, and I'll drink that after. But in the meantime, let me say to you, and I'm going to, I would normally put a Bordeaux cherry, which comes from Oregon, the same places that Old Tom does, but since I ran out of my Bordeaux cherries, I'm going to use a little bit of orange, which will work just fine in this Manhattan. A salute. Not bad, eh? Anyway, thank you for sitting in for 15 or 20 minutes with me. My name is Dale DeGroff, and I'm here on behalf of the San Francisco World Spirits Competition, which is coming in 2022. I missed it in 2021, couldn't travel. I'm all vaxxed up now, back on the road again, and raring to go. I might see you in a city near you. I'm taking a show on the road about sours before too long. Thank you, and a salute. Both lovely.